just to kind of introduce myself, my name is Christie Roethlingshoefer. I have been involved in the sport of cheerleading for over 20 years within the province in a variety of capacities, whether it's as an athlete, scholastic and all-star, as a coach, scholastic and all-star, as well as a judge. I've been judging for about 8 years with the ACA. So I have had experience on the rubric system. I've had experience on the Cheer Canada comparative system, as well as like IASF and those types of things. So I do understand the transition that happens between the two and how hard it is to kind of move yourself to this ambiguous comparative system. So feel free to ask any questions that you may have during the presentation. Like I said, we're really just going to go over the system, give you a good understanding of what this means, and then so you are able to kind of understand how the judges are, what the judges are looking for, how they're completing that score sheet, what rankings may mean, and of the like. So I'm going to start basically with what does comparative mean, because this has a different connotation for every single person. So in terms of judging on the score sheet, what we are looking for and what it means is that we're going to have ranges that people fall into or different teams fall into in different categories, depending on how they kind of meet different criteria that the judges are looking for. So a note that the ranges are going to be really broad and the teams are ranked comparatively against each other in the same division and in the same level. There should be consistency across the level, regardless of the division that you're in. So what you'll hear people talking a lot about is a level standard. And so what that means is us as a judging community have a really good understanding of what our average means for a level 1, what our average means for a level 2, what above average would look like for a level 3. And regardless of the age, we're comparing to that and we're using that as our level standard in order to figure out where people compare to each other. Now, it's actually based on the difficulty of the skill performed, not necessarily related to a level. And this will make sense when I actually go into talking about the difficulty of different skills. So when we're talking about difficulty of a skill performed, it's more than just identifying a skill and saying how hard it is. It's talking about different aspects in terms of how many people are involved, how fast is it? Is it connected to something else? So it's multifaceted in this area. So that's why we start with our level standard, and then we look at all of these individual factors that go into how we can compare each team to each team within the level or within the division that someone is competing in. One key thing here, and this is very different from a rubric style system, is that there are no set values attached to any certain skill, any set of skills. And so it makes it a little bit ambiguous, which is why that level standard is so important and why we really drive home with judges that all of your factors that you're considering, or your drivers that we call them, need to be accounted for so we can really have an accurate representation of where team A is to team B to team C, even all the way up into team like F and G sometimes. Sometimes we have divisions that are 8 and 9 teams deep, and we really need to understand and be able to compare them to each other, the very first team to the very last team that goes. The other thing that I want to point out is that comparative will mean that there is variation of scoring from day to day, from event to event, and throughout the season. So it's not advantageous in any way to compare your scores and your actual point values from one competition to the next. It's a good idea to say, okay, where am I in terms of ranking with the teams that I am competing against, and where am I on the standard deviation, which I'm going to talk about next, in the level? That's a really important piece, but comparing exact scores to exact scores are something that will honestly drive you a little bit nutty, because it's not going to be the same from competition to competition. Again, you have a different set of teams that you're competing against. You have a different set of judges, and knowing what I'll talk about again next with the standard deviation and where people fall within the ranges, it will most likely never be the exact same score that you are given from day 1 to day 2 or competition to competition. So how do we keep track of this? How do we really make sense of what this looks like as judges? And how do we then put this into a ranking system that we are then going to award? So what we kind of do is there's a set rule that with the first 5 teams, we're scoring them and we're putting them onto our tracking sheet and we're comparing them to each other. However, those scores are not set in stone. And there's a reason behind this. And so say, for example, I put A up here, I put team B a little bit higher, I put team C down here. And then when team D comes out, I say, oh, they're right in between team A and team B. But I didn't leave enough room to really kind of spread those teams out and to really see if there's 3 teams left, that there's not a lot of room left between A and B. If those other teams sit there, what we're able to do is we're able to spread those teams out a little bit more so that it's a more accurate representation of who fits where on the score sheet. Now, something important to point out is that when a judge is looking at their score sheet and doing their rankings, they're only focused on one specific part of the score sheet. They're not saying overall, everything factored in, I'm going to put this team here and I'm going to put this team here. If I'm a building difficulty judge, I'm only looking at building difficulty. If I'm a tumbling execution judge, I'm only looking at tumbling execution. And so the thing to note is that everyone is being ranked in these specific categories. And then once they all get put together, then the final rankings come out. So it's not all encompassing like that for one specific judge. They are looking at one very identifiable aspect of the routine. And then we balance it out or average all those scores out at the end to get the final rankings. So like I said, we hold off on those first 5 before we really solidify them, just in case we need to make some adjustments in order to slot some teams in, because that's the right place for them in tumbling difficulty or the right place for them in overall. And then this way we can ensure that there's consistency throughout that division. And we can also make sure that our level standard is accurate. We've also had times, I've been on the supervisory panel where we've actually come in and we're like, oh, we see the first 5 teams and we go, that's really low. Let's actually bump everybody up a little bit. Now everyone gets the same bump up, but we move it into the proper area where we see it fitting with the level standard. And this allows us to do that and then still have a really fair, accurate representation of where each team falls in comparison to each other. So what we really want to be focusing on is the overall ranking, which is why we're not hammering home that specific skills are worth a specific amount of points, because we want to make sure that the rankings are correct in comparison to everybody within your division. Okay. And like I said, the judges are going to use the level standard in order to determine that standard deviation and make sure that teams are sitting appropriately within the rankings. Now, I'm going to just quickly talk about the standard deviation and then I'll pause for questions because I know that this, again, can be a little bit ambiguous. So if you'll go way back to your education, at some point you talked about standard deviations and that bell curve, right? And within each category, now we're using a 20-point scoring system. There are different categories that are worth 10 or worth 5. Just imagine that these numbers are different. The bell curve still has the exact same meaning and the exact same purpose. So when we are looking at this standard deviation, 60% of our teams should fall within this normal variation, which is a couple points on the top side of average and a couple points on the low side of average. So that's where 60%, so 6 out of 10 teams should fall, is within this value here, this normal variation. Then there's room on the top end. So the top 20% is teams that are exceptionally strong. So above 80%, right? They are 80% execution-wise, difficulty-wise, performance-wise, deduction-wise. They should be sitting up there. Then we also have 20% reserved at the bottom, where if we have some teams that are more on the weaker side or the very below average, we then have room to place them as well. So this is why we need to have those first 5 teams held to make sure that not all 5 of them are sitting in this top 20 or 25%, or not all 5 of them are sitting between 10 and 13, because that's a very, very small gap, meaning we don't have a lot of room to slide in other teams comparatively, right? If there's 10 teams in a division and our first 5 are within 2 points of each other, that is so close. And so we need to spread them out and really make sure that we're using this standard deviation in order to accurately represent where people fall in terms of our drivers and in terms of our average versus above average and below average. I'm going to pause for questions for a second. Feel free to unmute yourself, put it into the chat, raise the hand feature. Okay, great. If you have something that comes up, please just go ahead and put it into the chat. I know Aspen is monitoring that. So we're going to move on to different sections of the score sheet. So like I said, different judges are focusing on one specific aspect. So if you look at a panel of judges, there's 2 building judges. One is focused on DOD, or degree of difficulty. One is focused on execution. Same thing for tumbling. One person is focused on difficulty and one is focused on execution. Then you have an overall judge. You also have a deductions judge. And then you have other people on the panel that are assisting as well. And a safety judge as well. So when we're looking at this, we have multiple people with eyes on building, multiple people with eyes on tumbling. And so we're going to go through all the different drivers that help us come up with what that score looks like, again, comparing it to our level standard. So with our degree of difficulty, these are the drivers that we use, or the factors that judges use in order to determine how difficult is a stunt. How difficult is an entire sequence? How difficult are our pyramids? And this can get a little bit complicated as well, because there may be an intro stunt, then there may be a stunt sequence with 4 or 5 different elements in the middle, and then a third stunt sequence with 2 or 3 different elements, and they have to factor all of those in and come up with an average score. So our percentage of team participation, when we're looking at stunts, this is divided by 4, because a normal stunt for an all gender is a 4-person stunt group, 2 bases, or 3 bases if you want to have your spotter, your third count as your other base, as well as a flyer. So we're looking at how many people are involved in that stunt. If there's a 5th person or a front spotter or a 4th on the front, however you label that individual, that will be a little bit easier than teams that do all their stunts with just 4 in a group. So if you think about it, how many people are involved is going to be a factor for stunt difficulty. The other thing in team participation is how many people out of your entire team are participating in stunts. Are only 2 going and performing the same skill while the rest are sitting at a prep? Are all 5 stunt groups doing something and there's maybe only 1 extra person left over? That is a factor of how difficult the stunt sequence will be. Reason being, synchronizing 5 stunt groups and having them look exactly the same is a lot harder than just 2. So that's why that is a factor in terms of difficulty. As I mentioned, minimal use of bases, so using 4 bases versus using 5, or including co-ed style stunts, so single base stunting with just 1 base and a spotter and a flyer, that is going to be more difficult to execute than having 4 people in a group. So those all factor in as well. And what you want to kind of look at is, when we're seeing this, we're looking for all these check boxes, right? Okay, do they meet minimal use of bases? Yes or no? Do they have co-ed stunts? Yes. Do they have their entire team participating? Yes. Do they have 75%? These are all the things that are going through a judge's mind as they're watching different elements of the stunting section. Degree of difficulty is a factor that is has a multitude of things in it that we consider. So degree of difficulty, amplitude is one thing that we consider. So with amplitude, think about the someone performing a prep where they barely get it up to here versus a team that does a prep and there's that nice little rainbow and it goes like to the forehead and comes down. Same thing when you're looking at anything like a ball up. Is it barely getting there, or is it going to the forehead? Those are things that we're looking at, because that will increase the degree of difficulty. The intricacy of what we're doing is, are you going straight up and straight down every single time and the flyer is going back to the floor? Are they moving while they're in stunts? Are they pulling body positions? Demonstrations of strength and flexibility are also considered in this. Technical skills that would be level appropriate for a specific level. So like in level 1, doing your single leg stunts with minimal bases and only one spotter, that would be considered something that is a little bit more technically advanced than just standing in a pre, or just standing in a double base and having 2 feet instead of being on 1 foot. So all of those factors are within degree of difficulty. So this is a piece that we look at in combination with the rest. So when we're talking about different skills, a variety of load-ins, dismounts, transitional elements, the combination of skills and the pace of the skills. So for example, going up into a single leg stunt, immediately hitting a TikTok, doing a quarter turn down, and then transitioning into your next stunt is going to be a lot more difficult than going, hitting a single base stunt, waiting for 4 counts, doing a TikTok, waiting for 4 counts, sponging down, turning. That's the type of pace and combination of skills that we're talking about. Now, I'm only talking about level 1 right now, but this goes all the way up to level 7 as well in terms of combination of skills. And any additional skills that are included, they do not have to be level appropriate. Say, for example, someone on a level 3 team wants to include a barrel roll, but it is clean, it adds intricacy, it allows them to transition into another skill. That is something that we will obviously take into account, even though technically barrel roll can be done in level 2, right? So all of those rules that we have within a level are great, but we can also use any of the other skills below to add intricacy, to add pace, in order to make it more of a complex movement compared to just all at level skills that just happen 1, come down, 2, come down. Questions about stunt difficulty. I know it's it's a lot to kind of consider all at once. All right, let's move on to pyramid difficulty. A lot of these are going to be very similar. The one thing that I will kind of add on to it is the idea of the use of structures and the variety of load-ins and dismounts and transitional elements. This is something that you will see that is very obvious from the spectator point of view. If teams are just going up, coming down, going up, hitting, coming down, versus teams that have transitional elements or multiple things going on at the same time, it's really easy to kind of compare those from a spectator point of view, and judges take the same things into account. The use of structures here is something that is obviously unique just to pyramids, because we're combining or connecting our structures together, or our stunts together to make structures. So there is a minimum of 2 that are required in order to actually really hit the higher range or the average range in pyramid difficulty, and then you go up from there. That just has to be 2 completely different pictures. And so you could have people that are teams that do 5 different structures, but have 2 connect over here, and then 3 connect, and then all of them connect. So the use of structures and the use of those transitional elements really go hand in hand, because it doesn't always have to be all of your team connecting. It's just how they integrate them and how they use them within the time that they are doing the pyramid. So most of these are going to be exactly the same factors or drivers that we would use for stunts, including those non-level appropriate skills, including those minimum number of bases, including the pace of skills, and how they're combining everything together in order to actually move from one section to the other, one structure to another. All right. Now, like I said, with that team participation, this is something that we use based on groups of 4. So like our normal all gender teams that are going to be competing in a traditional stunt group. This is what we use in order to figure out, okay, what could be the maximum number of groups that this team, based on their number of people that are on their team, that they could have. So if there's 5 to 7, obviously you can only have one group. So if there's a team with 7 individuals and they have one group going that has 4 bases and then another group that's a single base that has 3, and they're doing some skills together, that's going to be more difficult than just the team that's doing just one stunt group the entire time. Does that make sense? Same thing when we get over into our next category up, right? If we have 8, you can obviously divide 8 by 4 and it equals 2. So there's our our maximum amount of groups, traditional groups that could be made are 2. However, if you have a single base stunt happening over here, or if you're in level 1, and you'll notice a lot of times that people do single base stunts either on the leg, holding it, gut, whatever that is, that's going to be more difficult than just your traditional stunt group of 2 throughout your entire routine. So that's how we look at this. This is the minimum, obviously, that we would look for them to be saying like, yes, they hit their team participation. Anything over and above that, that would be considered into that above average category. All right, toss difficulty. Some of these are the same, looking at the pyramid difficulty and the stunt or building difficulty. Reason why some of them are different is because usually there's specific parameters in the rules. Say, for example, in level 2, there's only one type of toss that's permitted in level 2, and that's a straight ride. And so degree of difficulty is not even factored in at that point, because every single group should be doing a level 2 straight ride toss. So that's not something that we factor in. Same thing when we get into skills that are higher than that. So level 3, level 4, the parameters basically are like a 1-trick toss, a 2-trick toss. But there are certain skills that are more difficult than the other. Say, for example, a full twisting toss versus a toe touch toss. The full twisting toss is going to be more difficult than a toe touch toss. So anything that is spinning around an axis, anything that's adding multiple combinations of skills together is going to increase your difficulty. The height of the toss is something that is also really important. As we're looking at it. And this is what we're looking for. Again, we have our level standard of what we feel a toss should be. So as you're looking at your groups that are throwing, they should be a decent amount. I believe it is a certain number of inches. I'd have to go back and look at it. It's on my judging sheet. Certain number of inches above your hands for if you're throwing as a normal amplitude or height of toss. Anything over and above that, again, we would go, oh, they're moving up into the above average category. Again, we're looking at in terms of average, above average, and below average. And then as well, when we get to that team participation side over here, we actually divide these by 5. We don't see any advantage safety-wise to say that you need to be tossing in groups of 4, because you will get more height, and tosses normally are more safe with the execution of skills, ability to actually do a full twist, a rotation of some sort, whether it's inverted or not, a specific skill, and then prepare to be caught. There's no advantage of having 4. So we don't want to reward or say that you need to be doing that in order to get a higher score. It's just simply based off of 5 groups or 5 people in a group. So you can have that front spot and not be penalized for it. We would rather people be safe in those regards. Any additional skills or combinations of skills. So that could be anything leading up to or after the toss itself. So leading up to the load in and or after the catch, those will be included. Again, they do not have to be level appropriate. If a level 5 team, again, wants to include a barrel roll, great. That's a combination of skill. Even though a barrel roll is technically a level 2 skill, it's still adding something in terms of complexity, pace, combination of skills. And like I said, minimal use of bases does not apply. We are factoring it by 5, not by our traditional group of 4. What you'll also notice just in this top right corner, I should have pointed this out before, I have included here the value of what that portion of the score sheet looks like. So for pyramid and stunt difficulty, they're worth 20 points. Toss difficulty is worth 5 points. So if you look at how much of your routine is comprised of stunts, comprised of your pyramids, comprised of tosses, this is also a guide for how coaches make their routine based on how much value is put on different sections of the score sheet. Okay, any questions about difficulty in general before we go pop over into the execution side? No? Okay, great. So execution is equal to the amount that the difficulty is. So I put pyramid and stunt execution together because they're virtually the same. And then we'll talk about toss execution, but you'll notice that they're worth the same amount of points. And so there is not a reward for doing the hardest skills you possibly can and just barely making it. We again want to ensure that your difficulty and then also your execution are equally weighted and therefore are equally safe. So anything that you're putting into the routine, your execution is a huge portion of this. And to make sure, again, that it is done in the proper way with the proper progressions, and that your team is safe, your athletes are safe as you're performing these different skills. So our execution of skills, the biggest thing that you need to factor into this is that it is determined by all athletes on the floor, not just one individual. So we all have seen those teams where there's one individual stunt group that may be struggling a little bit more than others. We're looking at the average of what is performed on the floor. Yes, of course, those little bobbles will come into effect, but we wouldn't take that entire team of 5 stunt groups and move them into the below average category if everybody is performing at an 8 and there's one stunt group that's performing at a 5. So we're not going to penalize for the individual. Same thing that we're not going to reward for just the individual. If everybody is performing at like a 50% or a 50% of execution, and then there's one team or one stunt group that's performing at an 8, we're not going to give the whole team an 8. We're going to find the average. So something really important to note that sometimes there's certain areas, some certain stunt groups, some certain individuals that kind of draw your eye. The judge's job is to zoom out and to look at the performance as an overall of all pyramid sections, of all stunt sections and everybody involved. And you'll see when we get into different areas here, some of it applies to top people, some of it applies to bases, some of it applies to the entire group. So when we're looking at the execution of the skills here, there are a number of factors, just like there was with degree of difficulty. So we're looking at control, we're looking at the speed, we're looking at flow, any mistakes that may have impacted the execution or the stability, the control of the stunt. This also, whoops, sorry guys. This is also really important to note here. It includes loads, transitions, dismount, non-level appropriate skills. It's anything that is considered a stunt pyramid that is in the building section. So this could be for a level 5 team, this could be the pre that is in the middle that is just having so much trouble staying upright because of all the things that are going on around them. Maybe all their level 5 skills hit great, but we still have the factor of instability potentially in the center, potentially deductions or bobbles that are getting taken off. So that's again why you're looking at the broad spectrum here of all of your athletes that are on the floor. So going into the stability of the stunt, this is the control, this is the stance, specifically of the bases and spotters. So if you're looking at a stunt, we are not just watching the top person or not just watching the bases. If the top person is performing flawlessly and their bases are running around underneath them, number one, good for them. But two, we are going to consider the stance, the stability of the bases when we are giving that execution score. Same thing on the other side. When we're looking at alignment, uniform flexibility, body control of the top person, is their body in line? Are they out of line with their bases? We've all seen those stunts that start to tip and then you see the flyer go and then the bases are left and then they kind of come back underneath. Those are the types of things that we're looking for in terms of the alignment of the top person. The other thing that we're looking for is uniformity of technique. This is across bases and across flyers. So we're looking at how the stunt is performed. We're looking to see, are their loads uniform? Are their stances uniform? Do we have, as long as it's the same skill, do we have the same flexibility style that is put into and performed by bases, by top people, by spotters? So that's what we're talking about with uniformity of technique. Synchronization, this goes again through anything that is considered a building skill, loads, transitions, skills, whether they are at level or not, dismounts. Again, it doesn't matter how simple or complex these are, we're looking for them to be synchronized if that's the intention. And that also factors in, people ask all the time, well, what about ripples? What about coming up and down at different counts? Absolutely. Your judges know how to count. And if you have somebody that's dipping and it's taking them 2 counts to get down, and then the next person goes, they're on the right count, but it takes them 1, and then this person takes them 3, and then this person takes them 2. That's not uniformity of technique and synchronization, because we're all off on different counts. Even though we were meant to be rippled, it's talking about the amount of time that it takes to dip and extend and come down. And everything like that will factor in to the execution. When we're talking about bobbles are considered within the score as in they're noted. It's not like, oh, I need to take 1 point off because someone bobbled. That's the safety and deduction score judge's job in order to determine if there is a deduction or a safety violation that will be given. What it is it's factored into the entire group. So, for example, if we're looking at a team of 4 stunt groups and 2 of them are wobbling and bobbling, I'm going to consider that because 50% are showing above average execution and 50% are showing below average stability. So I'm going to make a score that averages or considers those factors. Again, not that I'm penalizing a specific amount, it's something that factors into the score. All right. And what I'll talk about in terms of the idea of this as well is I gave the example of 50% and 50%. So out of 4 stunt groups, 2 were unstable. That's something that judges consider very specifically as percentages of teams or percentages of groups that look like they are in sync, are using uniform technique, have uniform flexibility, those types of things. So if you have 4 flyers in the air, 3 of them have beautiful heel stretches and 1 is considerably lower, that's only going to be 25% of your team that doesn't have uniform technique, compared to a team that has 1 amazing, super flexible person, and then 3 of them are average. You're going to give them an average score, right? So that's how we use those percentages in order to determine where they fall in comparison to other teams and where they fall on the standard deviation for execution. I know those are a lot of factors. I've been talking to you guys for a hot second here. Do you have any questions? All right. Toss execution is going to be very similar, but there are some additional things that we look at in terms of the factors that we're considering. So execution of the skills, again, same thing. Is there control from the top person as well as the bases? Is the pace the same with all of our groups? Are there any mistakes that are potentially made? For the base technique, what we're looking at the stance again. We want to, it is a factor obviously in stunting as well, but for tosses, it's such a singular skill where bases need to be close together at all times when they're setting, when they're dipping, when they're tossing, when they're catching, everything like that. So this is why we have this as a factor. Use of arms and legs for power, following through at the top. Is the timing on with the bases? We've all seen those tosses as well, where one base dips a little early and you kind of see that like motion of the ocean movement. whether they're reaching up, looking at their flyer and really watching the skill, waiting for the catch to come down. For your top technique, we're looking at, again, uniform flexibility here. So if all three are doing kicks, one is like maybe at waist height and the other two are super high, we're going to take that into account. There's 30%, 33.3% of your team that is going to be below average flexibility, while the rest are average to above average. The basket position, so how your flyers load in. Are they dipping all at the same time? Are some taking really big jumps before? Are some really low with their bums in the basket, or are they holding themselves? So standing quickly and pushing off of your bases is a super important factor. And why this is really important is because it affects a lot of other considerations, like your degree of difficulty. If your flyer is not standing at the same time as your bases, your amplitude or your height of your tosses is probably not going to be as high as a group that does, because they're all in sync. They're using the power together compared to being off time and not necessarily taking advantage of the full height and power. Again, control. Are they riding within their own little cylinder? Are they riding to the top? In your skills, are toes pointed? Are the skills hit precisely? Could I take pictures of each individual movement? Or is it this really flowy motion that I can't tell where it starts and where it ends? Your positioning after the skill and during the catch. So in your movement and in your performing of the skill in the air, is your body alignment in its cylinder again, or is it causing your entire group to move? Are you twisting when you shouldn't be twisting? Those types of things. In the catch, this is more for bases, but arms are high, bases are close together, they're absorbing with their legs, and it's controlled. It's not running all over the place, or people aren't stumbling afterwards. That we consider within the execution score. Again, the uniformity of height across the team. If we have one team or one group that's up here, one that's down here, and one that's in the middle, we have three of them that are all on different heights. That could be a difference of strength. That could be a difference of timing. It could just be that toss just didn't go very great, versus a team that is within a little bit of each other, and we can take a picture and they're at very similar heights. And we usually use the banner, like the backdrop, in order to tell that, because it's really easy to use a landmark across the banner in order to figure out if people are similar heights or not. And then obviously your synchronization and timing. This goes for the combination of skills potentially connected to a toss, as well as their load in, the actual skills that are being performed, as well as all the way into the catch. So this we're looking at from the very beginning of the skill, from the initiation to the very end. Okay. Our last factor here that we use for building is our creativity score. This is worth 10 points. And this is determined by both of your building judges. So like I said, one is focused in providing scores more for the degree of difficulty. One is noticing and providing scores for more of the execution. They work together on a lot of it and will double check to see that their partner agrees with them. However, they're giving the scores on their own and they're giving their comments together. Their building creativity is something they actually factor in and usually average the scores. So they'll talk about it and come up with an average score of what the two judges feel for their building creativity. So these are the factors that we use in order to determine whether a routine that is choreographed in the building section is creative. We look at the variety of skills. Now, this is for what we see as the level standard. Again, it's not because we see one team come out and we're like, holy smokes, their creativity is here. And then automatically the next team that comes out, we put them all the way down at the bottom because they didn't necessarily live up to the team beforehand. There's a little bit of comparison, but you have to remember we're also using our level standard here. It doesn't have to be something that we've never seen before. It doesn't have to be something brand new. Yes, that's always encouraged in trying to push the envelope and really be creative in your combination of skills and your pacing and your movement. but it does not mean that everything in your routine has to be brand new and something that no one has ever seen before. So we're looking at all of those variety of skills. So say, for example, you have 2 different stunt sections in your routine. How are you getting into those skills? Is it that you're doing an inversion on the way up in one, and then you're doing a twisting element up in the other? Great, that's considered variety. There's 2 different entrances. Or are you having your flyer load in and you're just going up? Those would be similar. That would not factor into variety because you're entering the exact same way. Same thing with your skills. Are all of them prees, or are some of them utilizing different elements like single legs or fake single legs? Are you using movement like TikToks or moving across the floor? Anything like that is going to add into variety. So not every single skill is the same. Intricacy. So this again talks about in terms of combination of skills, pace, how intricate is it with watching? So when you're looking at the idea of combining skills together, that's going to be more intricate because there's going to be multiple things they have to hit compared to going up, coming down, going up, coming down. So that is a factor. Anything that provides a visual effect. So again, when we're talking about movement, this could be simply moving and doing a transition versus staying in the same spot for your entire routine. Innovation and creativity in loads, stunt, pyramid structures, transitions, dismounts. Again, I repeat that it does not have to be something we've never seen before, but if our average is that we're looking for teams to have, you know, a couple things for variety, some combination of skills to be intricate, we look and we see some visual effects that draw our eye versus teams that we go, oh, that's different than it was 20 seconds ago. Oh, and there's another thing. As we're counting all of these things, their building creativity score is going to go up. So think about utilizing different people in different spots, ripples or different timing that's used, movement, creative entries, using inversions, using twists, using a transition of bases, using for structures, the variety of structures and what you're doing. Are they just connecting hand and arm the entire time? Or do we have a connection to waist? Do we have a connection to a foot? Do we have 2 people connecting over here and then transitioning and moving into 4 people? All of those add to that creativity level. And then obviously your intricacy of your routine that you've put together. Okay, that is the end of building. So I'm going to pause for another second here and just ask, are there any questions? And it doesn't even have to be about how do you get to a score. It might even be, can you explain variety again? Can you explain degree of difficulty, amplitude, anything like that? Please go ahead and ask if you have those questions. Okay, great. I'm going to keep going then. So when we, just as we have this with tumbling, or sorry, with building, we also have the same thing with tumbling. So there's 2 people that are on your panel, one focusing and giving your scores for difficulty and working with the person beside them who is giving the scores for execution. So a lot of what I did in terms of explaining what something means is going to be very similar, but we're just talking now about any tumbling skills. So individual skills that are performed on the floor. So we are considering team participation here. The really important thing to factor in for tumbling is that in levels 1 to 4, single passes are not considered in increasing your DOD. So if you have a level 2 team and all you have is single pass, single pass, single pass, single pass, single pass, doesn't count. So they must be group passes in order to actually count towards your tumbling difficulty and keep increasing what you are doing. So you'll notice that the use and combination and synchronization of passes is going to be a very strong driver here in tumbling difficulty, because there does need to be a minimum of 2 people tumbling at the same time. So for team participation here, again, we're looking at what is your percentage. If you have 20 people on your team, How many people are performing it? If 15 are going in a group, that's 75%. That's really hard to coordinate and have 75% of your team, 15 people, doing the same pass with the same technique at the same time, landing at the same time, standing, connecting with the audience at the same time. That's going to be a lot more difficult than only having 5, right? Degree of difficulty and complexity. So again, if we're looking at a running tumbling pass, if we're going to consider level 2, are we doing a round off back handspring? Great. That's the bare minimum. Or are we doing a specialty pass? Do we have a front walkover, round off back handspring? Does that add to the complexity and difficulty of what you're expecting the athletes to do together at the same time, in sync, with the same amount of technique, with the same amount of speed? That is what we're factoring in when we consider difficulty. Variety and combinations. Is every single person in a standing tumbling pass doing a back walkover, back handspring, and then nothing else, and you do it 3 more times? Or do we do a back handspring? Do we do a back walkover, back handspring? Do we do a single back handspring, T-jump, single back handspring? Those are going to add to the element of degree or variety and combinations and increase your degree of difficulty, because your athletes are demonstrating multiple ways in which they are able to successfully perform a skill, not just one way. Use of synchronized passes. So not only are we considering the number of passes, but we're also considering the number of athletes in each pass. So you'll see a lot of times that you have 2 people running out of the corner and they have the same specialty pass. And then you have a larger group tumbling section that all does something the same. Then we have a small group going again. As you're looking at the number of passes that are going, and then also the amount of people in each individual group, that will then factor into the degree of difficulty. I do want to clarify one thing, and I do see a question in the chat here. I'll scroll down in a second. Awesome. To be synchronized, there's only one part of the skill that needs to be synchronized in order for it to count. So for example, if you have a group that is running out of the corner, and say you have 3 individuals, they all do a round off back handspring. That's 3 people that are synchronized. And then maybe only 2 of them add a second back handspring. Then you have 2 people that are synchronized. So it still counts. Or say, for example, you have 2 people that run out of the corner. One does a round off back, or they both do round off back handspring. That is going to be synchronized and will count to your degree of difficulty. But if one individual keeps going, we don't count that extra portion or the part that they're doing by themselves as a synchronized pass. Does that make sense? So only one section of it needs to be synchronized, or one skill, in order to be counted together. So you can see, or as you're kind of watching, I'm watching some of your faces go like, oh my goodness, this is so much to think about and so much to watch. That's why we have 2 people watching and sitting on the panel, and they're able to discuss together, because there are things that can happen very quickly like that, where you're like, there's 3 people going, oh, now there's only 2, now there's only 1. So there are a multitude of factors that come into play there, and a lot of counting that has to happen, which is why you'll see judges scribbling all the time when you look at them up on the stand on their scripting sheet, so they have something to reference back to. And then, as I mentioned, the complexity of the passes, the greater the complexity, the more people there are, the more combination of skills, obviously, the harder the pass is going to be, which will increase your degree of difficulty. All right. Here, your tumbling execution is going to be very specific to how each individual portion of the skill or of the pass is demonstrated. So we are watching from the beginning, the very first step, very first movement and entry into the skill, through the skill itself to the very end. So the execution of the skills, body control, positioning, height. So body control can be something as simple as in forward rolls. Is someone staying super tucked all the way into the end of the skill and able to stand up without using their hands? Or do they let their legs go and they really don't have any momentum to stand up? It can be as simple as that. Or it can also be as simple as in a back handspring. our legs are apart, our arms are bending. There's not a lot of height or power that is pushing us through that round off into our back handspring. So there's not a lot of movement. Our tumbling might be very short, might be very high instead of long and powerful. And we're looking at all of that. Leading into the power. So what speed are you approaching and are you building within your tumbling passes? And I'll use a round off back handspring again for level 2. If we have a really powerful round off and then our power just dies in our back handspring, and then we're not even able to get a second back handspring out of that, we know that we do not have consistent power and speed all the way through the pass. Same thing that goes watching somebody do a round off back handspring back tuck, and you're seeing round off back handspring and then they're barely making it around and touching their hands in their tuck. That can go to a couple of things, talking about their positioning and their height, but also their speed that they're maintaining throughout their passes. Their body lines and body control. Do we have straight legs and arms when they're supposed to be straight? Body alignment throughout the skill. Do we have somebody that we can tell their pass is slowly veering off to the side because their body is potentially not in alignment? Do we have somebody throwing their head in tucks and not setting? Those are things that we're looking for as well. Landings, we're watching all the way until the very end. So when we are watching somebody land, we want it to be controlled. Feet are together, chest is up. Stylistically, if they're ending their pass with their arms by their ears, are they bent or are they hunched over? Can we not see their face? Are we stumbling at the end, or are we almost touching our bum to the floor because or our knees because we're so low? Those are what we're looking for in landings. Uniformity in technique and style throughout the team. So this is something as simple as a power hurdle, that's an entry into a skill, versus somebody that takes a running step and they're going together. That's not uniformity of technique. If they're supposed to be synchronized all the way through, we want to make sure that they're using the same style and entry all the way through to the end. And then again, synchronization, which has a lot to do actually with speed in a pass. You'll notice that people start off synchronized in running tumbling a lot of the time, and they might end a step or two ahead or behind of their partner because of the speed or technique that they have. We want it to be matched and uniform, so that synchronization continues all the way to the end of your skill. All right, jump, difficulty, and execution. So you'll notice actually that I combined these two on your, there we go, that I combined these two. That's because it is factored together. There's not two separate scores for jump difficulty and execution. So it's a combination of two things. Number one, the factors that we talked about over on this side here with your difficulty. So percentage of team participation. Do you have 15 out of 20 jumping, or do you have 10 out of 20 jumping? It's harder to make 15 people synchronized than it is to make 10. Variety and connection of jumps. Are all of them single, or do you have a double or a triple jump in there? As you add more complexity with more jumps, tumbling added to jumps, if it's allowed in your level, it will make this more difficult. The synchronization from the start, the prep, however you stylistically prep, to the swing, to the jump, to the landing. The height of your jumps. Does everyone jump the same? And again, that moves into uniformity of technique. Are your legs the same height if you're doing a toe touch or a pike, or are they all over the place? Are some low and look like star jumps, and are some hyperextended? The speed of your jumps. When you jump, are all of you going up at the same time and landing at the same time, or does it look a little popcorny? Uniformity of technique, again, approach stylistically. What is your team chosen? The landing style. And what we mean by that is, do you have people with arms by their side? Are some tucked in? Are some still out in a T position? And your arm placement when you're actually jumping. And then also that positioning. So talking about your flexibility. Are our legs positioned the same? Are our toes pointed? Do we have hyperextension? Obviously, a hyperextended jump is going to be look better, but then also be more difficult than doing a star jump. So again, this is a combination and out of 5. Okay. I know I'm at the top of the hour here. If you are able to stay on and want to talk about overall, I'm more than happy to do that. It will go through fairly quickly. Overall, as a single judge that basically is going to evaluate the overall look of your routine, how it flows, your formations, your dance, and everything like that is on one score sheet. Each factor or each area is out of 5. So with your dance, there are a couple of things. We're looking at obviously the difficulty of your dance and the ability to incorporate levels, incorporate formation changes, including dance skills that create visuals. So again, levels and formations, how is it moving? Seamless transitions, are people bumping into each other and are they getting stuck on the floor or lost somewhere? Footwork, partner work, floor work. All of this is a factor with high level of energy and entertainment value. Your dance difficulty and execution is considered together, just like your jump difficulty and execution. So it is a combination out of 5, and you're considering the degree of difficulty with how well it is performed, how well it is seamless, how well it creates visuals, how well I'm able to see all of these complex things that you're trying to incorporate, and the performance of it. Your routine creativity, this is separate from your building. However, as an overall judge, it is their responsibility to look at the entries into different skills, transitions in skills, including your building, including tumbling, any motions that are included, incorporations between skills or between sections, unique creative ideas, additional skills to enhance the overall appeal. That's something that enhances the clarity and the flow of a section of your routine, the transition between the two. And so your factors that influence your building creativity will also impact your routine creativity. So it's looking at it as an all-encompassing feature, not just in your building skills. A lot of these are going to be the exact same factors that are with your building. However, it's considered also in any transitional skills. It's considered in dance, in tumbling, in jumps. Any of those additions should be used to enhance the performance, enhance the impact, and the positive effect of your routine. That will increase your routine creativity. Your formations and transitions. This is a very, very weighted category. So you'll notice that the first 2 were only worth 5. Transitions and formations are worth double. So it's worth 10. And so this is something that I'm sure if your athletes come home and say, oh my goodness, like they're hammering where we go, how fast we get there, making sure it flows. This is why. So when we look at this, there needs to be a variety of formations. Again, difficulty and intricacy of these formations of movement is obviously considered. The precision of the spacing in formations. Are you supposed to be in a straight line? Are you on line? Are you on quarter mat? Are you on half mat? Should it be a V? Should it be a W? Should you be in windows? All of these are factored in for precision. Seamless patterns of movement. Are people running into each other? Is my eye drawn because there's 2 people that have to run from the far corner of the mat all the way up to the front in like 6 counts, and I just see them absolutely beelining it for the front? That would not be considered a seamless pattern of movement. Timing, pace, and flow and execution of those transitions. Does it just all work and it's almost like a dance that people are doing around each other? Or do you find that people are hitting each other? It looks awkward. People are looking for where they're supposed to be moving. That all goes in, comes into play here, as well as the use of the floor. Now, this is something that can get a little bit confusing. Basically, with variety of transitions, or sorry, variety of formations and use of the floor, it's not just going out, coming in, going out, coming in. It's what combinations and what formations are you utilizing in order to maximize the use of the floor to display all of your skills. So for example, utilizing windows in one area, then utilizing a V, and then going out to different corners, and then stunting on this side, and then moving to the middle to enhance something, then spreading out from there. So that's what we're talking about, movement with use of the floor. It's not just changing formations out and in, it's a variety of all of those formations that come into play with the use. Something else to also consider in terms of your spacing, this is in effect for all of your group tumbling. So the start, the middle, the end, do people land together where they're supposed to land, or are they on like 3 different mats? Your jump sections into jump tumbling, any of your tosses or stunts that move, your dance, even with your moving transitions and moving formations in dance, this is also considered. All right. And then the overall impression and showmanship. So this is not just considered the performance category. There are a lot of factors here that need to be considered. So energy and genuine enthusiasm. This is not the person that hits a facial every 2 seconds, right? We're talking about being genuine. So yes, there's choreography that goes with that, but it's the genuine enthusiasm of really enjoying what you're doing. Your face is lighting up. That's what we mean by genuine, not just choreographed facials. Appropriate athletic impression. And we've really wanted to move towards this, as your routine should be a celebration of your skills, your strength, your development. We want the athletic portion to really come through. And this is an all-around factor, right? This is building, this is tumbling, this is jumps, this is dance, these are motions, performance. This is the area that we really want to see people highlighted on your team that have that athletic ability, or that performance ability, or that tumbling ability, or that strength in stunts. We want to see people highlighted and really showing it off. Confidence and eye contact. So this goes along again with that energy, but we really want to see from flyers, from bases, from stunters, tumblers, dancers, not looking forward at their coach or looking at the floor, but really connecting with the audience and thinking about like projecting out compared to just being like, hey, yeah, I'm hitting a motion, like really proud to be where they are and having that confidence in performing a skill. A consistent and comprehensive level of showmanship. So what we mean by that is people can be genuinely enthusiastic, but it only happens when they're jumping. And then when they're transitioning, they completely turn away from the crowd and that connection is lost. We want to keep that consistent through all portions of your routine. So through that whole 2 minutes or 2 minutes and 30 seconds, we want to make sure that it's a consistent connection and energy level that's maintained, and that it doesn't drop off during the end, when you're exhausted from the end of a pyramid, or maybe if something goes wrong in your routine and that energy level drops. We want to maintain a certain level. These two kind of go together here. So a positive and memorable experience and an impact and perfection of the routine. So they're not dependent on one another, but sometimes they go together. So the impact and the perfection of the routine is being just like, wow, that was really good. It may not be the hardest routine you've ever seen, but it was performed really well. And that is something that we look for. Again, the positive and memorable experience from the start to the end. As someone watching, yes, your judges are looking for specific things, but I'm still a spectator. I'm still watching your routine. I want you to finish and me to go like, yes, good job. That made me feel good. That made me feel proud. That made me feel excited. That positive experience is something that we want to take away from your routine and get, because of things like your performance, like your perfection, like your confidence that is projected out. That's what we want to see. So when I say that the showmanship and routine impression is not just the performance category, this is why, is because it's a factor of a whole bunch of different things that we want to see that leaves us with that positive feeling at the end of your routine. And again, it is worth 10 points. So it's really, It's half the amount of what is needed for your building. It's more than what's needed for your tumbling. So that's something that we really want to make sure that we're seeing. All right. Anything with overall that you may have a question about? Okay. The last thing I'll kind of just touch on here is just something, because we've talked about point values. I was referencing everything in terms of All-Star. All-Star prep is also a really important division and multitude of different divisions that are included within cheerleading. And the building values in terms of, oh, sorry, that should say difficulty categories, not building categories. My apologies. Difficulty categories and execution categories are different. They're worth different values. The reason being, with the prep teams, we don't care how difficult your routine is. We're really focused on building skills, building confidence, building technique, building perfection and progression before moving on to something more difficult. So what you'll notice here is that our difficulty category for building is 10 points, where the execution is worth 20. So it's worth double, as well as your standing and running tumbling is combined. So we want to see a general demonstration of tumbling, not a certain amount of standing, a certain amount of running. Again, we're just focusing on really building the confidence and the execution of skills, not necessarily hitting certain targets in standing or running. We want them to be together because we really want that focus to be, like I said, on the execution and the building of perfection of skills, not trying to hit a certain number of difficulty. As well, the dance score emphasizes execution. So your execution is worth more and considered more for the score than difficulty is. So for a regular all-star dance, we consider it about 50-50. Here, execution is what we care about. We're really focusing on the uniformity of the technique, the performance, the seamless transition. So you'll notice that when you have an all-star prep score sheet, it looks different. And again, all the emphasis is usually on the execution categories, not necessarily the difficulty. So we're really focused on proper progression here and perfection and confidence. Okay. How are we doing? That was a lot of information that I threw at you. Are there any areas that you feel you would like more clarity on, or that you're just like, I just still don't understand how this factors into the standard deviation? I would love to jump into that with you if you have any questions.
Christy, could I just ask you to touch on the differences between the deductions for major building falls versus building falls or
Yes.
downs and that kind of thing?
Let me pull up for you. I'll actually pull up the sheet so you can see it, because I feel like that would be the best way for us to look at it. Bear with me for 1 second and I will grab it up. So the biggest thing with deductions, safety violations, anything like that, that it comes with a safety judge or a legality judge, the rule of thumb is always to err on the side of the athlete. And same with judging, right? Or with doing anything with building and tumbling. What we want and the purpose of a legality and deduction judge is to make sure that things are safe, make sure that we're not potentially putting people in danger because someone's not ready to perform a skill confidently, and there may have just been an error. We also have level appropriate skills for a reason, because we want to make sure that we are not putting somebody in danger of progressing through something too quickly. So if we look here at our lovely all-star deduction sheet, so the main thing that we're probably wondering about is these building categories right here. So, and I'm hoping you guys are all seeing the proper screen. Yes, you are. Okay, good. So building baubles are something that are like, they're very specific, and there's a multitude of different ways that teams can get baubles. So as we're looking at this, stunts, tosses, or pyramid that almost drop or fall, or includes excessive movement. So what I was talking about when I was talking about building alignment, where like you see the flyer really tip over and then the bases come under to catch her, or there's a really wobbly knee and then they end up saving it, or the bases almost drop it but then get it back up. That would be considered excessive movement. So we're looking at movement up or down, lateral movement, forward, backward, or visible instability. So all of those are a factor for whether or not you get a building bauble. The key here is that they're saved somehow, right? Blatant incomplete twisting, a knee or a hand touching the ground, controlled cradling, or bringing a stunt down early. So there's sometimes teams that will, if something's about to fall, they'll kind of dip and pop and put it into a cradle to save it, to make sure that they don't fall. That would also be considered a bauble because it's not a timing issue. It was unstable, and then it was brought down early. So that's a bauble versus a fall. And the key word here is uncontrolled versus controlled. That's where we see the difference between the baubles with visible instability, movement, but they're still controlled. They're able to save it. They're able to bring it down early, versus uncontrolled. That's where we see uncontrolled cradling or catching, dismounting or bringing it down early. This is something that what I kind of use as like a rule of thumb is if it's a flyer, if they're standing there and they didn't have someone to say push their butt back up, they would have fallen, right? That is uncontrolled. Someone comes crashing down and they have to let go of a foot to go catch somebody. That is uncontrolled. A base is underneath and they trip over themselves, because that happens, and the stunt comes crashing down, but they catch it in a cradle. That is uncontrolled versus, like I said, being able to regain some balance where we are able to control, bring it down right through the middle, or bring somebody down into a position where they are no longer in danger of actually hurting themselves. This also includes a base falling to the performance surface during a cradle, toss, dismount, catch. That means a bum on the floor. Okay, that could be a knee or a hand. Like say if someone catches and puts a hand to the ground, but the butt's not on the floor, that would be a bobble versus a fall. A third that catches and then drops to the floor, that would be where we would consider that a fall. A major building fall is where we have an individual stunter pyramid to the ground, where the top person lands on the ground. It doesn't matter what part of the top person. If any part of the top person touches the floor from a stunt, pyramid, or toss, that is considered a major building fall. So again, if we're talking about baubles, controlled bringing it down, a lot of movement or visible instability is going to be your bauble. Your building fall is uncontrolled and or a base falls to the floor. Major building falls from any stunt, pyramid, or toss, the flyer hits the floor. Now, what happens when we have a building fall where the base falls and so does the flyer? Technically, if we add a -3 and a -4 together, that's a -7. We, again, don't want to be overly punitive, so that would go into a maximum building deduction. So when there's multiple deductions that happen at the same time, we don't just want to add them all up, because it happens sometimes where things just go wrong. We don't want to give you a -10. We just give you a maximum deduction of -5. So instead of adding them all up, then it's a little bit easier on your score. Something new that was introduced this year was the pyramid collapse. This is when multiple deductions are assessed within the same pyramid. by 2 or more groups. Again, because you potentially could have 2 major building falls added together. We don't want it to be overly punitive. So the max we can give is a -6. Does that clarify some of the deductions for you guys?
I think it does. That was a very detailed and good explanation.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so again, some of those really key words, controlled, uncontrolled, who's hitting the floor, the base or the flyer, those types of things. Awesome. I do have a couple of examples that I just kind of found from previous seasons that I can throw into the chat where these were individuals that scored really high within their division. I can go ahead and put those in the chat if you feel like going ahead and watching them, but I'm not going to take any more of your time this evening. So if you want to go ahead and peruse them, you can. But otherwise, if you have any questions, feel free to stay on. Thank you so much for joining tonight. I hope this was able to provide you with some clarity and you're able to kind of look at a routine with a little bit of a different eye as you're watching as we come up to our first competition this weekend. If you're competing, good luck. I will most likely see you there.